For tonight, I'm super excited to welcome our guest, Perry Cohen from the Venture Out Project, a nonprofit whose mission is to make the outdoors a more inclusive space for members of the queer, trans, and LGBTQ plus communities. To start tonight's session, we're first going to watch the Venture Out movie, and then we'll have time for further discussion and Q&A with Perry himself. Perry, would you like to say anything before we start the film?
Just want to say hi. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited and really looking forward to chatting with folks after the film. And this film was made in Rocky Mountain National Park by some really excellent filmmakers, Spruce Tone Films and Trans Wave Films, who also happen to make an amazing short miniseries called Trans in Trumpland. So a little shout out to them. Check that out if you like this film. But yeah, let's chat after.
All right.
The outdoor community for a really long time has been a space of, white privileged men. So I think there's a movement amongst many, many diverse people and groups to say, let's make more visible the fact that we have always been in the outdoors, you just haven't known it. I love the word queer. To me, it is the only word that fits to describe my identity and my experience. My name is Perry Cohen, and I live in Northampton, Massachusetts. I came out as lesbian in college, and then coming out as trans didn't happen until I was 30, I guess to myself, like in 37, and to my friends and family, 38. So it took a really long time. The only surgery I'd had before that was my C-section with my kids. They were the impetus for me to kind of dig back in and re-examine who I am and what my gender identity is and how I want to walk through the world as a demonstration to them of what a good person is and does and the kind of person I wanted to model for them. Oh, I love you. Have a great day. So my transition, I feel like, informed the whole second phase of my life. It was incredibly freeing for me, and that was the beginning of the Venture Out Project. The Venture Out Project is a nonprofit organization, and we lead backpacking and other outdoor adventure trips for members of the queer LGBTQ community. Our first trip filled up, like, immediately. And then after that first year, people started signing up for multiple trips. And so I asked someone, I was like, don't get me wrong, I am thrilled that you're coming on multiple trips, but you could do this on your own. You have all the skills, you have all the equipment. Why do you keep coming back? And they laughed at me and they said, you're completely missing what you're doing, Perry. This isn't a backpacking organization. You're building community here, and backpacking just happens to be the means by which you're doing that. I think one of the things I like most about Venture Out trips is that participants come from all across the US, all different ways of life, all different experiences.
I've been exploring my identity since I was 14. My name is Tyler, and I use they, them pronouns. In high school, it wasn't safe for me to even look gay. I was like really suicidal for like 3 years and depressed, and I had a severe eating disorder. The Venture Out Project was like my first introduction to the queer community and actually being with people that I could relate to and not feel like a weirdo. It totally turned my view of myself around. I found out about it on Tumblr. I saw the post for some free spots on a backpacking trip for queer youth. And I got so excited that I rolled around on the carpet screaming.
Tyler found us on Tumblr, which is amazing because I don't even really know what Tumblr is. Tyler is this go-getter, totally energetic, possibly the most positive person I've ever experienced in my life.
I'm going on my first adult trip in a couple days, and before this I've only gone on youth trips. We're going to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and I'm really excited because I think it's going to be a landscape that I've never seen before.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
How was your trip?
It was awesome. We're out on the trail. But what I'm starting out tomorrow is I'm deciding to wear a pair of shorts just because I know
Everybody coming on the Colorado trip identifies as non-binary and or trans. We found that though we are an all-inclusive LGBTQ organization, people really, really gravitate towards our identity-specific trips. So whether it's a BIPOC trip or a trans trip or a women's trip, those tend to fill up faster than the open trips.
My mom heard about it in like Backpacking magazine. She was just like, hey, you should look at this, and I did, and I'm like, what are your people? Colorado? Yes. So,
This is my third trip, and I just love coming here for the community, and it's just awesome to be outside and be relaxed.
Obviously, on the trail, we don't know everybody, and for safety reasons, a lot of times we decide not to tell them that we're a queer group, just for safety reasons.
We are definitely going to be challenging ourselves, right? We maybe haven't been backpacking before, maybe haven't, I don't know, shared something about ourselves that we might share with this group. There's going to be the opportunity for many, many different types of challenges while we're here. And I would really welcome everyone in the group to try to move forward and try to challenge yourself in some sort of way.
There's about 3 different aspects and maybe a couple different levels because we'll come out and have a report.
Okay, good, perfect. We're gonna have one of the guides in the front and one of the guides in the back, okay? So we're gonna keep a steady, slow pace. If you need a break, let us know. You're gonna feel it a little bit. We're gonna be going up today, but you guys are all very well and capable of doing this. And you're gonna be really proud of yourself once you get to the top, so.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Just whenever I'm in nature, I feel all the pressure just kind of fall away, and I don't have to be someone specific or be anything. I can just exist and not have to think about it. And for me, that's such a release. With the Venture Out project, the experience is being with people like you in your community who you can relate to and that you can find safety with that you may not have at home.
The strength of intergenerational connections on trips is that people get to hear about what life was like for the people who came before them and what life is like for the people that came after them. Just because we're queer or trans or non-binary, our experiences are so vast.
I get such a thrill every time my sister calls me her brother. It's still all the time.
I was at work the other day and they were gonna fit a mask to my face. the person fitting, she goes, "Oh, you have a beard," and I was like, "Oh my god, I have a beard." It was just like you forget, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
When I close my eyes in my head, sometimes I still have a ponytail and all that stuff. So it is cool.
I transitioned 8 years ago, been on T for over 8 years, and I live as a man in the world now. And what I find is that around the water cooler, I can't talk about what it was like to go to an all-girls Catholic high school or what it was like to be a nun. I've lost 42 years of my life. It's what I wanted. I want to live life as a man, but I realize that there's 42 years of life not as a man that just can't come up in certain conversations. I want to tell a story and I chuck it. So here, I can be my full self.
I used to go to softball tournaments recruiting for college in Colorado, in Aurora, and that same tournament's still going on today, and we have softball players coming in. And I get really excited because I've played softball in college and things like that, and I'm taking care of these people, and I know if I say anything to try to relate, I'm just going to out myself. And it's just like, that was a huge part of my life and my identity, and I almost have to stuff that, you know? So I definitely understand what you mean by that.
With TVOP, it really gives me a sense of self that I don't really have in like the outside world, I guess, where it really helps me bring myself back to really who I am. And it's really what helped me find who I was in the first place.
And I love that you don't have to explain how that happened. Like when I talk about having had babies and carried babies, everyone's like, right. I don't get these looks of like, what the hell are you talking about? Or how does that work or something, you know?
In general, it just takes so much energy to go through life in like this cis world as a trans person, like dealing with those things of like, oh wait, can't say that, or like, I am gonna say this, but then I'm gonna have to explain all of this stuff. I come outside in large part to not have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. This is the only place that I truly feel like I can be my complete self. In most of the situations, I'm afraid to tell people if I'm trans, and then I wonder how I'll be treated after that, and it just kind of takes away from the whole experience. But knowing that everybody here just accepts for who we are, that's the reason you come back. The communities, the friendships, it's like getting to retreat to your safe space and then finding all your friends there. It just feels awesome.
There's two things we share, right? We share a love of the outdoors and we share being queer, and those are two really powerful things.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Lisa.
Good morning, everyone. So we are at 4:55 a.m. at Milner Pass, and we're about to climb Mount Ida. It is dark out. The sun should come up shortly. We're gonna do the summit round trip will be about 9.5 miles and 2,600 feet of elevation change. I'm psyched. This is gonna be awesome. Sunrise hike.
I learned a lot about myself through TVOP. It changed my life in every way, where I went from being this kid that just absolutely despised who I was and was trying to change everything about myself, to being someone who just really loves who they are and like really enjoys learning more. Like I love learning more about myself. It just is one of the most positive things in my life. I'm so hopeful for like my generation, because I feel like we're so far because of what the generations before us have done, and I'm really, really thankful.
Being a member of a marginalized community, it's really important that we have spaces just to ourselves where we can talk about things that we wouldn't feel safe or comfortable talking about in the presence of others.
Woohoo! You made it!
I think to be able to do it in the outdoors, in a place where we historically have not felt welcome, is a really important means of feeling empowered and reclaiming a space that should be open to everyone, but that we have felt excluded from for a really long time. My hope is that we change the outdoor industry enough to make it more safe and fun and affirming for all kinds of people, but especially trans and queer people.
All right. I am going to get Perry up here. All right, well, at this point, I think it's a great time to transition into some questions and Q&A and discussions. So if folks in the audience have questions they would like to ask, feel free to send them in the chat or in the Q&A function down in the toolbar, and I can read them off to Perry. Please don't be shy. We've got lots of time. This is a safe space to ask questions and share thoughts and feelings. So please, please ask away. Where did my chat go? Here we go. A question at the end: how does the outdoor industry have to change?
That's a good question. I don't think anyone has to do anything, would be the first thing I would say. I think, when I started Venture Out, I thought it was going to be all about bringing queer folks, LGBTQ folks out into the outdoors. And it was for a long time. And then we started getting brand partnerships and developing relationships with outdoor retailers. And one of the things we offer is education and training. And I think what I have realized over time, and I think what the outdoor industry as a whole has realized, is there's actually a lot of opportunities to learn, and for us as a queer group to kind of help educate and push the outdoor industry to recognize things. And so it would be, some of them are really obvious things like, making a bathroom or an all gender bathroom at a trailhead or something, or, not always just using the language of just men and women, but kind of saying like people or hikers. And those subtle exclusions are what make people feel unwelcome. And another example of that would be when you go into buy a backpack, and everything is either a men's pack or a women's pack, which is really kind of code for this works better for people with bigger hips, or this works better for people with bigger shoulders. But I think we all know there's such a diversity of bodies that it's not just trans people that want those different size packs, but lots of people want those different size packs. But if you go into a store and immediately get the message that you've got to fit into one of these boxes or we don't have gear for you, it's pretty hard to feel welcome. So I think there's lots and lots of situations like that, where you just walk into a store and it's like you're either steered to the left or to the right, but you might really want something on the other side of the store. It might fit you better, you might like the colors better for whatever reason. And so I think those are opportunities for change for the outdoor industry. And then I think other places that I would say the industry is coming along in is representation, whether it's in their blogs, in their social media, in their films that they're making, or the people who are making the films, or who's sitting in those executive seats, who's involved in some of these hiring decisions or some of the product development decisions, stuff like that. So I think there's lots of opportunities for it across so many different areas of outdoor industry.
Excellent. Here's another question. Any suggestions for state natural resource agencies who want to be more inclusive of LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the greatest ways to do it is to find the LGBTQ groups in your area and reach out to them and invite them to come in for a day, or, I think that kind of outreach is huge and people feel wanted. So that's a really big one. I think other ones, when you're reaching out to folks, think about the language that you're using. So is everything very binary, gendered? What do your ads look like? Is it all like, straight looking, white looking couples that are of, kind of opposite genders, or are there lots of different people represented in your materials? But the biggest step, I think, is the first one is the outreach. Find the LGBTQ groups, and they'll be all over the internet. And invite them in.
Awesome. I work part-time for a worldwide Swedish outdoor retailer that has definitely struggled with inclusion and representation. As someone in a low-level position, what would your advice be for helping facilitate change from the bottom up?
Yeah, again, super common. I feel like there are so many folks who are reaching out and saying, I feel this need, I see this need, I personally need this, but I'm not in a position of decision-making power yet. And I think it's gather your teammates within the organization. So is there an employee resource group that's focused on LGBTQ stuff? Is there a DEI department? Is there a marketing team that's sponsoring diverse groups? And if so, can you reach out to them? But I think the other thing that we've found is some folks have just reached out to us and said, like, I don't know what my company can do, but can you send us a proposal of a training or what a partnership would look like, or even just sharing our social channels with folks. And them, I think it's them seeing, wow, there are a lot of queer folks out there. There's a market for this. And, unfortunately, sometimes that's the way to make an inroads in an organization, is through seeing a market or a need or some sort of compelling business reason for them. But I think also if you can find other like-minded folks in your organization and do some work to gather kind of a critical mass, and then, write a proposal to the organization where it's, if it's coming from more than just one person, sometimes I think it has a little bit more weight.
Awesome. Perry, what does it mean to be an ally in the outdoors?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. I think being an ally to me means different things for everyone. But if I were gonna come to it, I would say it's actively educating yourself. So what are some of the issues going on out there? Who are some of the groups doing some of the work? And whether we're talking about racial issues in the outdoors, or gender issues, or ability issues, I think there's lots of different ways to be an ally to someone, or lots of different groups to ally with, but I think the principles are all the same. And to me, there's a big difference between like saying I support something versus taking some action. And to me, the best allies are the ones who actually kind of take some action. So whether it's educating themselves, whether it's donating to a group, whether it's amplifying stories from groups of diverse identities in the outdoors. I think also, like, another thing is, like, when you see different folks outside, trying to make them feel welcome, but not tokenized, not just staring at a group, but maybe going to talk to folks. I think it's also bringing, if you have friends who are queer or, BIPOC, or, have disabilities or something, inviting them outside and saying, like, let me show you what it's like to hike in my favorite place. And so I think, not being afraid to engage in the conversations, and to address issues of inequity when you see them.
Awesome. And don't be shy, folks. Feel free to keep submitting questions. I'll be passing them through. I'm kind of curious, Perry, how did You talked a little bit about like, you know, your love for the outdoors and how that led to, you know, creating the Venture Out project. What else was behind that? How did you get to this point where you were sat down and thought, I want to start an organization that does this?
I was just like super naive and I had no idea is the honest answer. I grew up in New Hampshire and had an outdoorsy background, and I'd done an Outward Bound, and I'd worked for them and worked for summer camps, and you know, had a lot of outdoor training. But I was working a corporate job, actually. I worked in my family's business for 13 years. And it was when I transitioned my gender that I was like, you know, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I remember this one day I was like, well, geez, if I transition my gender, like how hard could it be to transition my job? And I feel like, you know, in coming out to my friends and family, I'd like shattered all expectations, and it actually gave me a lot of freedom all of a sudden to do what I'd always wanted to do, which was work in the outdoors. But kind of growing up in the way I did, I felt like I'd been really fortunate to have a great education and a lot of support. And I felt like somehow I had to do something worthy of that education. And in a lot of ways that meant like a good paycheck and sort of prestige. And it was really hard for me to break out of that. And I think that coming out and that shattering of expectations was like, oh, you could go do something. And so I just was like, you know, I love the outdoors. It's incredibly freeing. It is the place where I feel the safest, the most authentic, the most myself. Wouldn't it be amazing if other people could have this experience? And I actually thought I was going to go work for some organization, because I thought, well, I can't possibly be the first one to come up with this idea. And I'm sure I wasn't. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right resources to say like, well, I've run organizations. I've been on the grant making side of things from a corporate side. I bet I could figure out how to start a nonprofit. And that's where the naivete came in, that I had no idea what it takes to run a nonprofit. It's so much work. But it's been this thing that I finally got to give back to my community. And when, you know, somebody asked me earlier today, what was like a really important moment for you? And it was when people returned to trips, because I thought, well, it's hard to get them for the first time, but you have to do a really good job to get somebody to come back. And so I think that's been part of the most powerful and exciting parts of this work, and why I keep coming back is like, we get to see people who, I mean, as you see in the film, like their lives are really impacted by the work we do in the community that we help create. And so that, I don't think I realized I had that vision. I just thought the vision was take people outside, but it's evolved into that. And I guess that's why I did it.
Awesome. Question from the audience. I sometimes struggle with being thoughtfully intentional, but like you said, to avoid tokenism. Can you give an example or definition around what might be viewed as token actions, in your opinion?
Yeah. So one that happens for us a lot as an organization is someone will call and say, oh, June is Pride Month. Can we sponsor you for this month, or can we donate, make a donation to you this month and have you, make some social posts about our organization? And my response is, that's really great. And I'm so glad that that's your entry point, but we want someone who's going to recognize what we do is important for the other 11 months of the year as well. And so I think it's thinking about like, not just making it about something that looks good, but something that really is investing in a community and really is actually making a difference. So I think it's kind of like, on an individual basis, it would be like, don't just share a post on, National Coming Out Day or something, or Trans Day of Visibility, but, pay attention to these really harmful bills that are being put up in so many different states, and make some calls to those governors, write to those legislative bodies, and actually take some action. And that is not just doing a token action, but that's like actually something that matters. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Cool. How does your organization work to be inclusive of people with different access to resources?
Great question. That was one of our founding principles was we just looked at, okay, what are the barriers to access that we can think of? And, one of them was money. One of them was transportation. One of them was gear. One of them was just kind of anxiety around being a beginner and never having been in the backcountry before. So we have a really robust scholarship program. We also provide all of the gear, so nobody has to come with anything other than, like basically their clothes. And we even have that. And then we have some trips that are like specifically designed for beginners in an attempt to say, like, it's okay that you have never even hiked before or never walked in the woods before. We don't expect you to know how to do that. And so we really try to be really open and accommodating for things like that. Other issues of access for us, I think, are transportation. So we try to offer hikes and events that are either on a bus line or a public transportation access point, or in a pre-COVID era where we could offer carpools and shuttles and things like that to folks. We also try to do some trips that are for folks with different abilities. So backpacking may not be for everybody, but a whole other tranche of folks could maybe canoe, where you don't have to carry your gear and you can sit down. And so we have added canoeing. We've also do some events which are on universal access trails, which are much more wheelchair accessible for many folks. And we do some events that are just like a picnic in the park or something. So for folks who getting outside is a big adventure, and we really want to make it so that there's no hierarchy of like, climbing Mount St. Helens is so much better than going on a picnic. No. Any access to nature is really important and equally valid for anybody. So those are the ways we're doing it. We also have a kind of a really robust program where we try to develop our own volunteers and instructors. And so I think that's another issue of access where we have folks say, I never would have been able to have a job in the outdoor industry had it not been for Venture Out, or I never would have come on a trip had I not seen an instructor who looked like me or had a shared experience from me. So those are a lot of the ways in which we're doing it. And then the last one I'll mention is we are a predominantly white organization, and I think that can be a barrier for a lot of folks too. So we've partnered with some BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color led organizations to try to bring multiple communities together to make our trips more accessible. And if somebody's already sometimes we're partnering with an existing group, it can be less intimidating to sign up for a trip.
Definitely. This one is from the chat. I feel like the last year has created a lot of change in regard to this, but I know that some organizations are nervous about outwardly showing support for groups such as the LGBTQ community, because although they would welcome people from every community within their organization, they are worried that if they are more outwardly supportive, they'll lose supporters and donors because it's very politicized. What are your thoughts on this, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think we do see that. And what I say, we do a lot of consulting work, especially with a lot of schools who are very concerned about their alumni base or their donor base. And my response is, I can't tell you how to act or kind of what your ethics or your ideals are. But if you philosophically believe that inclusion and diversity and equity are really important to you, then you have to decide if you're willing to take a stand on that. And if you are ready to make kind of a public statement of saying, like, this is who's welcome on our trips. And if you're not, I think some people are starting to draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we stand for, this is who we are, and your dollars are really important to us. But if we don't match with your values and your ethics, then that's your choice. So I think there's a balance, and I recognize that people are in the business of, having to make money to stay afloat. But I think more and more organizations are saying, you know what, we're unequivocal about this, and we're going to come out and say that we are all about creating an inclusive and equitable organization. And I think what they're finding is that actually goes really far. And in a lot of ways, they may lose some donors, but they may get a lot more, because I think what we're seeing is people don't want to be part of an organization that doesn't have ethics and values. And I think especially around, social justice issues. So I guess bottom line is I would say it's an organization's choice, but for the most part, if they can stand behind what they say, and people believe that it's authentic versus tokenism, I think they're actually going to gain more folks. I think Patagonia is a perfect example of this. They came out really strongly, and they're having a bomber year, and they were absolutely clear in their belief about inclusion and equity.
All right, sure. Can you say more about your statement, "The outdoors is where I feel safest"? What makes that true for you?
This is for me, for sure. This is a unique situation. I grew up in the outdoors. I grew up in New Hampshire. It was just where I always felt at home. And for me, it is a place where I am emotionally safe. Like right now, every day I wake up and there's a new bill about trans people out there, or there's a shooting of, people of color or Asian women. You all live in Minnesota, you know this better than most of us. And there's a part of being outside where I can shut that off for a little while. And it's not about putting my head in the sand and not acknowledging what's going on in the world, but it's about taking a breather and looking around and saying like, whoa, what really matters is like taking care of this earth and taking care of these trees and these animals and making sure this stuff still exists. And so I think there is a calmness and an emotional safety that comes with all that for me. But also I think I'm in this spot where I'm not so critiqued or looked at, we're all stinky and dirty and greasy and, kind of in my view, our best selves out there. And some of that social pressure and societal pressure goes away. And that to me makes me feel safe.
That's something that when I was watching the movie too, I thought about with there's a little bit of a dichotomy with the wilderness being a place where you can be truly yourself and you can find this peace and this like the pressure of society is sort of lifted off of you. But at the same time, this was mentioned in the movie, this concern for safety from other human beings, that at one point, one of your guides says, we don't tell other groups that we're a trans and LGBTQ group for safety reasons. How does that dichotomy, this maybe isn't much of a question, but more of like a thought. What does that dichotomy feel like for you when you are thinking about inclusivity in the outdoors?
Yeah, I think, I walk through the world with a certain amount of privilege. And I think for me, when I'm outside, if I don't choose to disclose that I'm trans, I'm typically not read as trans. And wow, it's a new thing for me, but walking through the world as a white dude, nobody messes with you. It's really kind of outrageous to realize the privilege, especially going from someone who had a different, I certainly wasn't unprivileged, but didn't have the male privilege. But I think about it for our participants, and when we're in a big group, and because of what we're talking about or what people are wearing or certain presentations, sometimes it can be very obvious that we're a queer group. And we have, that is, you saw Lauren talking about it, but that is the very first conversation we have is like, okay, what are people's comfort levels with being out? Because we absolutely have had situations where we've run into people on the trail who have made us feel very unsafe, and we've packed up in the middle of the night and moved to a different campsite because of that. And I think I think that happens for lots and lots of folks of lots of different identities out on the trail. I've heard it from people of color, I've heard it from women, I've heard it from people all walks of life, because it's harder to get away from someone out there. And there's not a friend you can call or a car that you can hop into to necessarily get away. And so I think you're right. There is that dichotomy, and there is that issue where you may feel safe because you're away from certain amounts of society, and you may feel less safe because of it, who might be out there with you. And I was on a trip just like a couple weeks ago, and someone says, don't you feel incredible and safe and like you can just totally let your guard down in nature? And I looked at him and I said, "Hey, for me, it totally depends who I'm with." So I think that summarizes it for me, is it really is about reading other people.
Mhm. Yeah. From the chat, how big do you think your organization can get? Are you finding challenges besides just funding as you scale up your programs?
Yeah, I never thought we were going to get big, and then we did. And so I think, what happened was people kept saying, I can't get to you. Can you come to me? And I didn't want to say no, but at the moment that was my answer. And so a couple of years ago, we built a volunteer program where we brought folks in, 30 different people, brought them in, trained them, and then sent them out to their local queer communities and their local trail systems. And that has been how we've built the Venture Out's footprint. And so far that's working really, really well. I think, to me, ensuring physical and emotional safety is always going to be the most important piece. And so I want to make sure that as we grow, it is never at the expense of safety or a program quality. But I think over time, we probably will continue to grow the volunteer program. And I can see the potential of having certain hubs, maybe a Northeast, a Southeast, maybe a central hub. And then, hopefully partnering on stuff. But that's, I never want to grow just for the sake of growing. I want to grow because there's a need, and that we can meet it with the same high quality.
What is your process for hiring guides and bringing people on board to work at TVOP?
Yeah. So our request is that everyone starts by coming on a trip. And we realize that can be a barrier to entry, which is why we have the scholarship program. But part of the reason we want to do that is, one, it's just the best way for somebody to get to know us and us to get to know someone. And then two, I think, one of the biggest things people say when they come on their first trip is, I was so nervous to go meet this new group of people and do this new activity. And I think when our instructors can say, you know what, I was in your spot 3 years ago, and have that empathy and understanding, it is just such a powerful tool as an instructor to be able to call on. And I think as a participant to be able to share that with your instructor is really important. So that's what we like to do. Not everyone comes up that way, but we really do like to have folks come up and understand it. So typically they would come on an event or several events, then they'd be a volunteer, and then they'd come and apply for the instructor pool. And then also we have, when we grow I say our corporate office, there's 5 of us and it's not corporate. But when we grow our headquarters staff, our non-field staff, that we just put out on Indeed and on our website and social and stuff. And so that is just kind of like, we don't have to know somebody necessarily. We just want the best person for the job.
Cool. All right. As an organization who serves thousands of youth per year in an introductory way, meaning sometimes only a few hours in a single experience, what are some suggestions you have for our leaders on these events to create a welcoming space for non-binary kids or kids who may be exploring their gender identity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One, I think there's lots of trainings, and make sure that the staff not only understand what they're doing, but feel comfortable with it. And I think that is something that often happens, is that an organization says, great, we want to welcome our non-binary kids. But the staff hasn't necessarily been trained, and they don't necessarily understand how to use the right language. And so they're operating on a basis of fear, which is never good for anyone. So I think training is number one. Two is talk to people about pronouns. How are you going to introduce pronouns? How are you going to invite people to do that, but not require it? How are you going to invite people to share if they've changed a name? How are you going to make them feel safe? So for some folks, it may be like, let us know if this is a name and a pronoun you only want to use here, but you don't necessarily use at school or at home with your parents. So I think those are important. I think having an all gender bathroom is really critical. And just making sure that if they're in this group, they're using language that is inclusive. So maybe not assuming someone's pronouns, or not saying like boys and girls, but saying students or birders or campers or whatever it is. But I think it all comes back to education. And the thing I say is like it's always about like, the main goal is we want these kids to feel safe and excited, and we want them to feel safe enough that they have the capacity to learn whatever you're trying to teach them, right? So if you're trying to teach them to identify birds or to build a fire or something, they need that baseline level of feeling like I'm safe and welcome here, before we can ever ask them to do that other stuff. So I think figuring out how to establish that is really critical. And there's no like, if you do this, you're perfect, you've got this. I think it is ongoing education and learning, and being able to talk as a staff. This came up, I have these questions, what are my resources as a staff member to feel supported in this?
Thanks. This is something that I've thought about a lot, especially with the work that we do at Wilderness Inquiry, where we kind of have our model is everybody everywhere, come join us together. And looking at what you're doing with the Venture Out Project and how you talked about these identity group trips in the film, and kind of the power in bringing people with similar experiences together, because then there's that community of comfort and sharing and trust and shared experience. How, compared to those two kind of models, can you talk more about sort of the power of that kind of affinity group experience or that identity group experience, and how significant and important that is for developing as a identity that may not be represented in that community or that world?
Yeah, I'll tell you a story because I think this exemplifies this the best. So I think it was our second year we ran a ski trip, and it was a trans masculine ski trip. So we had 10 people for a week together out in Wyoming. And this guy came up to me on the last day and he said, Perry, I have to tell you something. I am only out to 3 other people in the world. And I'm not out as trans because I've really been ashamed of being trans, and I didn't think there could possibly be any positives to it, and I didn't think I'd be accepted, and I never saw anything good about it. And he said, and I came on this trip and I saw 9 other trans men, and I saw 9 other ways of being trans. He said, and nobody did it the same. He said there were very flamboyant people and there were very like binary people. And he said, but I saw for the first time in my life possibilities of what could be. And he said, and I've seen people who have jobs and have partners and have kids and are happy. And he said, and I all of a sudden, like, it's opened my eyes. He said, I'm actually going to go home and have my own gender reveal party. And so he went home and he had a party, and in the middle of the party, he ripped off his shirt and said, this is what trans looks like. There's a t-shirt. And he said, and my friends embraced me and they loved me. And he said, but I never would ever do that had I not spent this time with other trans people, and specifically trans men, to understand like what could be. So to me, that's like, well, why do we have these identity specific trips? Well, that's it right there. Somebody could feel comfortable in their own skin for the first time in their life.
Do you envision a future where maybe the next step is those more integrated experiences? Does that seem like that would be a trajectory for individuals with different identities kind of entering or feeling comfortable in mixed groups, or in predominantly maybe like white or cisgendered or able-bodied communities?
Yeah, I mean, what I say is like, I want people to have the choice to do both. I want them, if they want to come on a venture out trip and have it be queer only, that's absolutely great. And if they want to go on a more traditional experience, that they can also be an out trans person or an out queer person there and feel totally included and accepted, and like it wasn't any big deal to accommodate them on that trip. So I mean, if we could put ourselves out of business because the industry moves so far forward, that would be amazing. But I don't think we ever will, because I think people want both types of experiences.
Yeah, that's a beautiful future to like aspire to, especially as we think about programs and developing and you know, I love the part in the movie when you mentioned how people kept coming back because of the community, even though they had the independent skills to go out and do this on their own or with other groups. So that was really great.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes left. I'm just curious, what is your dream trip? Like, if you could go anywhere, where would you go?
Oh, I really want to climb Kilimanjaro.
Mm.
I just think I've never been to that area of the world. I would love to go see. I would love to not be in charge, and have someone else take me on a trip and teach me about another culture. And I would love to have an immersive experience where I get to learn and see something, and also climb something really high and really cool that I never thought I could.
Sounds awesome. We have another, were you going to say something? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was going to say also, since I'm speaking to folks from Minnesota, I have always wanted to go to the Boundary Waters, and that is like very high up on my list. So that's going to happen for sure.
That's great. Please let us know when you do. We would love we could take you or come along. It'd be really fun.
Great. Done.
Awesome. We have another question in the chat. Back to affinity groups. Is there a way for a general outdoor organization to lead identity-specific trips without tokenizing the leaders who will lead those affinity trips? Or is it better to direct participants to a community-specific organization such as yours or Outdoor Afro or something if they would like an affinity trip?
I would say, I think the options could be to reach out to us and say, like, could we partner with you, with your organization? That would be a really cool way. I think what I would caution about is saying to someone who maybe hasn't volunteered, oh, you're queer, you work for me, would you like to lead this trip? Versus kind of, as opposed to target, I think you could still offer that opportunity and say, hey, as an organization in a staff meeting, we're thinking about doing these affinity trips. Come talk to me after if anybody's interested. That way they're allowed to opt in versus being targeted to do the thing. But I think for all of us as nonprofits, we love the opportunity to partner with organizations. And, you know, I think it brings the best of all the worlds together. So I think there's multiple ways to do that.
Cool. A few minutes left. Any further questions from the audience that people are burning to ask? Otherwise, we can keep talking about cool backcountry trips.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, Perry, you mentioned you have volunteers that are kind of branching out across the country, leading trips here and there, and your dream is maybe hubs here and there as well. What, I guess I don't quite know what I'm trying to ask, but what is the like your participant, like, do you plan to kind of explore further these affinity group trips with lots of further, different identities beyond trans and queer? Is that kind of a future for the Venture Out project for you? Or are you trying to stay kind of true to the queer trans community?
No, I think the importance is recognizing that, like, there's so many intersecting identities, and I think that it's really important that we keep partnering with folks on these different groups, and that it's been fun. Also, part of it is, like, who are our instructors? We've got two amazing women who are, like, phenomenal canoeists. And so we're like, cool, let's run some women's canoe trips where anyone who identifies as a woman can come on these canoe trips. And we have these phenomenal instructors. And so I think we'll keep growing in that sort of organic, but also, like, what is our community telling us they want to do, and who can we partner with to make sure that we can have representation in our instructor crew and in our participant crew that's reflective of the affinity group we're trying to work with.
Cool. A couple more comments in the chat. Thanks, Perry. I truly appreciate your heart and intention with TVOP. Excited to see where the organization goes. And also another question, looking out towards retirement, is there a role for a cisgender male volunteer?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are LGBTQ inclusive. And also, I just recently got a request from a straight cisgender dad of a trans kid who was like, oh, can I volunteer? And I was like, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if we could have a parent group too? Because I think that's a huge need too, is like so many parents are doing these incredible jobs raising these queer kids, but maybe don't have their own support or their own community. And so I think the smartest thing I have done in this whole process is to listen to other people and recognize good ideas. So I'm super open to ideas.
Cool. Well, awesome, Perry. We have a couple just big thanks, great programs. It's been so fun chatting with you. Love to hear your stories and your experiences. The Venture Out film brings me to tears every time. It's incredible what you guys are doing. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If there's any final words you wanted to share with the group before we end the session.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and yeah, keep doing the work, keep asking the questions. Feel free to reach out to us. We do have space open on our trips. So, spread if you know folks, adults or youth who are looking for some trips this summer. Also, we offer open enrollment trainings and custom training. So if people are interested in getting their staff or themselves trained, that is a big part of how we actually support ourselves so that we can subsidize the trips for the queer and trans folks. And I'm not allowed to not say we're a nonprofit and we love donations. So we also appreciate any support we can get in that way. But I'm super excited with the work y'all are doing at Wild Inquiries. And yeah, thank you everyone for being here. This is great.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And everyone feel free to join us for next month's inquiry series. We're talking with Siren Nagakiri from Disabled Hikers, and we would love to see you all there. Thank you so much, Perry. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and hopefully we'll stay connected and see you in the Boundary Waters soon.
Yeah, for sure. You too. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.